everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute.
show these suckers how to ball out here. Oh, man, let me get this together here. Oh, layup. Oh, no. Shot. Oh, three. Oh, it's like Brick City out here. Mid-range. Oh, my goodness. I can't buy a bucket out here. I missed the whole damn basket. Oh, my goodness. What's going on, man? My game is looking trash. Oh, here we go. Black Power Media shirt. Now we cooking. Tree. I'm taking all three of y'all with these right here. Between the legs. Oh, my goodness. Behind the back. Layup. Oh, did he just do a reverse? He is in beast mode out here. I ain't got to look. It's falling. Oh, my goodness. This guy is going 3, 2, 1. Kobe. Nice. Black Power Media, baby. Nice. Empower yourself. Go get you some of that Black Power Media gear right here at blackpowermedia.org. Yeah.
I mix what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here at Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Again, for the purposes of this presentation that I'm about to get into very quickly, professionally a professor of Africana and Media Studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and have, of course, this podcast here with Black Power Media, and all of my other work going back actually now a couple of decades is at imixwhatilike.org, including a free copy of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, the second edition of which is going to be out next spring, and the first edition is at imixwhatilike.org for free. All of that is relevant, to the presentation I'm about to go through very quickly, and a big shout out to the conveners and organizers of Pan-Africanism or Parish, the conference for which this presentation was developed, and which is going on right now. Of those who are watching this live, I appreciate you and welcome. But feel free to check the link in the show description and go see the rest of the conference if you can, live as it's happening, or certainly after the fact. There are a lot of interesting and a lot of talented and intelligent, thoughtful people participating, and a lot of very interesting panels there. That said, I did want to bring my presentation, obviously, to our platform here since it was done. And so here it goes. It's not very long. It's an overview. I think a good conversation starter, but I was asked to present and develop the presentation that I will share here now, and which is for some reason not showing up. Now that's interesting. Why isn't it showing up in the, let me try that again. I just tried it and it was working. There we go. All right, that was weird. Anyway, so the title of this presentation is Narrative Warfare, the Struggle for 21st Century Pan-African Clarity. And again, I appreciate the title of the conference being Pan-Africanism or Parish, because of course that's correct analytically, but also because that's a title of the last book from Dr. John Henrik Clarke. May he rest in power. And that was always, of course, one of his goals for the African world, that is Pan-Africanism. For my purposes, and if anybody who's here live is interested or has comments or questions, I will check in the chat before I wrap up. Otherwise, I'm just going to go straight through this presentation just to make sure it's available on our platform. But anyway, as I've said here, it's my presentation is Narrative Warfare, the Struggle for 21st Century Pan-African Clarity. And as I approach Pan-Africanism, as I know it's defined and interpreted differently all over the world, Pan-Africanism for me is defined as it is done in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, of course, co-founded by Sekou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah. That is in the United States of Africa under scientific socialism. And I think this is important, especially given what I'll be talking about in a little bit. It is that such an approach, even if for some reason some might find it imperfect, Such an approach, I think, is important because it assures political clarity and prevents, in addition to European or any other imperialism, it prevents an encroachment or promulgation of Black capitalism. And a lot of what I think prevents Pan-African clarity in the 21st century is a hyper promoted old white conservative traditional value, that is that capitalism is the savior for humanity, and in particular for a formerly enslaved and currently colonized Black population. Black capitalism is the solution as opposed to political power. And of course, as I continue to argue, political power, broadly speaking, for me, does not mean Democrat, Republican, etc. It does not mean adherence to the current formation of electoral politics. It does not mean even necessarily only electoral politics. Political power for me means, as an extension of the definition of power from Dr. Huey P. Newton, that is the power to define phenomena and have it act in a desired manner. That's what I broadly mean when I say political power, and that should be our goal. Again, for public, virtual, digital, disorganized or unorganized political spaces, I think that's as specific as I think it needs to get. But that's what I mean. The ability to define phenomena and have it act in a desired manner. The ability to even more simply put, develop the kinds of policy and the ability to enact them that assures the peace and sovereignty and safety of our communities, and the ability to defend and protect that reality. So anyway, but I'm happy to come back to that as well. But that's, in general, that's my approach to this topic, and I just wanted to make that clear. When I'm saying narrative warfare, I am again encouraging that phrase be understood as would terms like propaganda, psychological warfare, information warfare, worldview warfare, intellectual warfare, marketing, branding, entertainment, public relations, strategic communication, mass communication. Again, all of these phrases are euphemism for an intellectual or an immaterial assault on the consciousness and public opinion of a target community. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I happened to come across a quote from a former professor of mine at the University of Maryland in the PhD program for public communication and mass media, I think was the official title, something like that. Journalism and public communication, I think, anyway. And Dr. Ray Hebert, and as I told the story this morning, I remember he, being in one of his classes, and this is, even at that time, he was a senior faculty member with a big name in U.S. and Western journalism and journalism teaching and education. He had the history at the Voice of America, which of course is the propaganda arm internationally of the United States. He was, a big time. And we, in one of our classes, I remember it came up in the context of my positive support for the Cuban Revolution and Dr. Hebert's condemnation of Fidel Castro as and his regime as assaulting press freedom. So we had the whole class, and we had really a semester-long debate about what press freedom means and Western objectivity means. But I remember saying to him, I said, but Dr. Hebert, imagine you were like Castro and you get 86 people strong under Grandmama, or I think that's the boat that they got on, and I think it was 86 people for some reason. That's the number I remember. And they start the revolution to overthrow Batista, and I think only 12 survived that initial assault, and Castro was captured and tortured, and you go through all of this and you finally overthrow, and you finally, years of struggle, you succeed and you win and you come to power. Are you really going to turn over the media arm or open up the press arm of your struggle to just any sort of false concept of Western objectivity and more directly, as has been documented over the years, of U.S. imperialism intervention in your media? Like, would you really do that? And even Dr. Hebert had this, in that moment said, no, you're right. I see, and then I don't want to oversimplify, or I am oversimplifying his argument, but he saw the point. He acknowledged that, I get it. Like, that makes sense. And then that went on to his credit, and I do like to acknowledge this because it's often or too often not the case, but I appreciated in that moment this older white man coming completely out of the U.S. context and frame, allowing, in that moment, at least in a classroom, room for some competing ideas without hostility necessarily. I'm not saying we were friendly, we were cool or whatever, but it was at least an open forum, which another time I'll tell more stories of how that was not always the case for me. And I think we all know it's not always the case for others. But anyway, to the point for today, what he says here, the quote I found here that I'm quoting here, is important because it acknowledges the perspective from which those in power approach media, communication, journalism, etc. So again, whether we accept its impact on us individually or collectively, I think is a separate conversation. And for me, and usually not even really of that much relevance. I'm more interested in what those in power are intending with their approach to media and communication. And in this sense, what he says here is exactly right in a good summary. And that is, quote, "The effective use of words in media today is just as important as the effective use of bullets and bombs. In the end, it is no longer enough to just to be strong. Now it is necessary to communicate. To win a war today, government not only has to win on the battlefield, it must also win the minds of its public." And I think his quote here is particularly important as the way it ends, "win the mind of its public." So in this context, he's not even talking about winning the minds of an opponent or an enemy combatant. He's saying the minds of your own community, the people within your own purview, the people you falsely label citizens, they have to be controlled if your efforts are to ultimately succeed. There has to be an appearance that what, as I would put it, imperialists are doing has the support or is in support of the masses of their own people, which even in the context of just white people is not the case. So anyway, so I think that's, and it's also a good reminder of that quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski, where he talked about in 1997 in the Grand Chessboard book that the necessary takeover of land and resources in the so-called Middle East would require first the support of the masses of U.S. citizens and their public opinion. So that's where obviously people with conspiracies and others get into whatever people think about 9/11, at least the use of it in terms of messaging post 9/11 to be a cover for all this imperialist activity. But that's what they're talking about. But that is directed at the home population. They're the initial targets. All right. Because, of course, for all the discussion of the U.S. as an empire, I think there's still all these years after using that as a term in reference popularly among those in African diaspora circles, radical pan-African communities, the left in general, referring to the U.S. as an empire. What that means, I think, doesn't get enough attention for some reason, or I could be wrong on that, but in other words, that empires don't create citizens and democracies. They create subjects and colonies, externally and internally. And as Kwame Nkrumah said, capitalism practiced at home is domestic colonialism. So from their perspective, that is those in power, media, the media environment we have is that has been imposed on us and is, that's not just a singular event. The imposition of this media environment is reoccurring. It's a process, an ongoing process, is designed to produce psychological warfare and the reduction of citizens to subjects, and Africans in particular to disassociated apolitical beings. And for me, being apolitical means an inattention to the goal of political power as I previously described it. So too much focus on, as I'll get to, Black capitalism, to ill-defined pan-africanism, to white conservative Eurocentric politics and ideas branded and rebranded as nationalism and even radical nationalism, which I'll come back to in discussing finally these three dominant narrative themes that I think are playing a harmful and negative role by intention and design in this Pan-African unity that I've also previously described and defined. So the three dominant narratives, as I see it, are Black capitalism disguised as nationalism. So that has, for my work, has become increasingly a focus and a problem. And part of what I've been reawakened to, perhaps, in that work is the longevity, the longitudinal problem that this has been in an intentionally promoted and encouraged conception of Black capitalism or Black entrepreneurialism or Black business as some sort of move towards sovereignty, as a replacement for political power, again, as I previously described it. And when we when I reassess the media environment in this advanced digital age, so to speak, the penetration and the reach of an ever decreasing amount of mostly European elite men, it's to a greater degree than maybe ever before masked the distribution of Black capitalism as sovereignty, as radical African revolutionary power than ever before. So as I start to, even in my own attempts to complete this essay, looking at the cryptoganda, I mean, admittedly, one of the many excuses or problems I'm having in finishing that is the tributaries behind this. I mean, for every earn your leisure layer that you pull back, for every Boyce Watkins layer that you pull back, for every $1 million worth of game layer that is pulled back, et cetera, and so forth, are these connections to the most conservative European and capitalist people, corporations, individuals. Every Hill Harper layer and Black Wall Street application layer that gets peeled back, there's Plaid and Prime Trust and ultimately BlackRock and Vanguard, JP Morgan, Bank of America. And in terms of media, CAA, what is it? The talent agency and all the celebrities they represent, with their connections to that incestuous music industry network of Sony, Universal, Vivendi, and Warner in time and Warner Music, Blavatnik, his group, Len Blavatnik's group. I mean, so in other words, these platforms with huge audiences, huge Black and audiences, and the diaspora, the African diaspora, replicates this as well. I just haven't made enough of a focus on that, put enough of my own focus on the details of that. But in fronting very Black looking, even sometimes radical sounding endeavors, are cloaking these most conservative and capitalist endeavors. Again, rebranding this idea that business is a solution, investment is a solution. And I get it that obviously this is a message that is delivered to white audiences writ large as well, but it has a particular perniciousness and a different impact when applied to any colonized population, as are African descendants or African people here in the United States. Just moving ahead a little bit here, same thing in a little bit more of a nuanced way, something that I'm struggling, admittedly, to parse out and organize in terms of my thoughts. But this ongoing anti-African LGBTQ thrust within the Pan-African community is, I think, again, a Eurocentric imposition, a white conservative imposition into Pan-African politics and attempts at Pan-African unity. That is, increasingly, information has been at least become aware to me, if not more broadly speaking, about the white conservative origins of the anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ politics, with the specific goal of creating what are seemingly populist issues to get mass support for very small in number conservative white elites. In other words, the only way to get mass support for the kind of imperialism and expansion globally that I was talking about earlier, the only way to get your own community to support that is not to promote that. That's harder to promote as being helpful or being of use, especially if you're drawing from those populations all the people that are going to have to do all the fighting and dying and killing. But it's much easier to get that kind of support electorally and otherwise, ideologically, if you can couch it in these issues as opposed to making it overtly about empire and imperialism for a few. They've explicitly said that, is again from Karl Rove's days in George W. Bush's era to the more recent that I've covered a little bit here, efforts among the Christian right in the last 50 years to propagandize their own community on those issues in order to get, again, support for empire, as opposed to, under the guise of defending their people and their culture and their population, et cetera, and so forth. That has been encouraged both directly through partnerships in business, to indirect support and promulgation and propagation through algorithmic support for those ideas. In other words, the advertising community that drives all commercial content is definitely going to be more supportive of Black content that promotes anti-Black gay inclusion in Pan-African politics. And then that's couched as something African and radical. That's decidedly Eurocentric, decidedly white and conservative, given, as we've talked a little bit about, African history, people, and the various approaches to identities and genders, et cetera. So again, there is the very righteous struggle of LGBTQ plus people in the African diaspora to be part of a Pan-African community, which of course they should be. And then there is the abuse of those issues by the conservative white right, who I think have infected, for lack of a better term, segments of a narrowly conservative nationalist African community that in the guise of protecting very, again, I think conservative anti-African politics, they hold up this attack on homosexuality or gender fluidity in among African people within the Pan-African struggle, all of, again, which is used to deny the collective effort towards political power. So similar to what I'm saying about Black capitalism as an imposed white conservative Eurocentric value system into African conversation and politics, I'm saying the approach, the conservative approach to LGBTQ people in the African community is itself a cloaked, that's the word I was looking for, a cloaked Trojan horse approach to infecting and disrupting Pan-African unity. And then finally, the same thing. So my own somewhat, I mean, a little bit humorous, but also legit attempt to promote the hashtag of soda. Shout out to Dr. Haight for its creation. But the solidarity of diaspora Africans, or the solidarity of dispersed Africans, as an attempt to somehow negate the symbolic and political hashtag reverse of that, is a similar thing. The algorithmically, politically, ideologically, an attempt to cut African people away from African people on the basis of imposed colonial boundaries. Again, Pan-Africanism or perish. Dr. Clark, one of his primary arguments was that Black tells you how you look, but it doesn't tell you who you are, and that Black people cannot define themselves on the basis of identities and place names imposed by Europeans through the process of imperialism. So to reverse that and call that the new Black radicalism and call that some sort of a Black attempt at a Black-led effort at Black sovereignty is a complete corruption of Pan-African politics and Black radical traditions, and is of course going to get the kind of support that we've seen it get in culture in the mainstream commercial press. And in pockets of African communities in this country and around the world that want that kind of disunity in their own myopic look for some sort of reward from empire and imperialism. So that is it. As far as the presentation went, it was meant to only be about 30 minutes and to leave time for Q&A. I went a little longer here. And then I'm happy now to jump in and see if there are any comments or comments, questions, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation, condemnation, consideration in terms of what I've said here. I did mention in the conference presentation, I did mention some by name who I thought were abusing, who were participating in that conference and abusing some of these arguments. Because in terms, I think there were some questions about what we do about that. And I think that there needs to be a way. And what I ended up what I was saying was that I have to, even reconsider my own engagement in that. Like I was talking historically about, the way Du Bois went at Garvey and Garvey went at Briggs and Garvey went at Du Bois and and they were doing the same kind of memification nonsense that we see happening now. They were doing the same kind of braggadocio name calling that we see happening now. I've participated to a certain extent in some jokes and making fun of folks. So I think we all need to have some thick skin in that regard. But I do think we need to be able to discuss these issues and others without it descending automatically to, if we don't agree, that's because you aren't African enough, radical enough, etc. enough. I mean, I think that, I don't know. So I think that is something that we need to work on, myself included. What do you consider nationalism in relation to the African diaspora? To the extent, P. Funk, that I understand the question, what I'm saying is that for me, nationalism is essential, but it has to be sort of an initial step taken into entering the global stage. So for instance, in the United States context, I think a Black nationalism is essential and should be aggressively adhered to. But for the purposes of seeing Black people here as an African diasporan nation, colonized as are any others, and therefore needing to engage the world stage on that basis. That would, from my perspective, be engaging in radical internationalist politics, in looking to develop Huey Newton's revolutionary intercommunal world. There is going to have to be engagement with other people, other communities, other variations of even African people in this world. I think that engagement has to start again by a nationalist appreciation for one's grouping on the pathway to some radical engagement, broadly speaking, so that when we enter that world stage, we are as a powerful equal as is anyone else, and able to, in a revolutionary way, organize and build. And that's why I started my definition of pan-Africanism as having this United States of Africa under scientific socialism, that I think that the scientific socialism, the redistribution, has to be a component of this. By the way, that was something I didn't get to too much in this version, but I think is important. One of the problems that I think with the narrative development is in too many cases, the fraudulent rejection of Marx as Eurocentric as a mask of both one's own Black capitalist tendencies and one's own narrow nationalist tendencies, and a way to, and by extension, in so doing, diminishes and devalues all of the African radical engagement with socialism and communism and Marxist ideas, et cetera, and so forth. To dismiss all of that as following some white man, I mean, is so dismissive. And I think part of that narrative warfare that is encouraged that disrupts Pan-African unity. So I think we all have to find a better way of dealing with that. The materialists, as I've argued, need to do better in addressing themselves to Afro-pessimists and race-first thinkers. And I think vice versa is also true. Because if Pan-Africanism is to occur, it can't just be Pan-Africanism based on you being African by my definition, and then ideologically in my camp, and sexuality and gender-wise in my camp, and if you're not, then you're not part of this Pan-African struggle. That doesn't work. So that's sort of what I mean by the. So I would even argue this from my outsider looking in towards a Pan-African LGBTQ plus community. They have a righteous need to struggle around their particular issues and engage the broader community on that basis, but within the context of building that Pan-African struggle and recognizing that not every African is going to see the world exactly the same way. So there has to be, it can't be we're building an LGBT struggle that wants to supersede a Pan-African one or wants to separate from a Pan-African one. And that's the way I would feel about those of us who are so-called bi or multiracial, those who come from any other part of the diaspora. specific group interests and needs and whatever are important. But it has to be towards a certain end that I think that otherwise it loses its value and can then be rebranded or used to rebrand the white conservatism and Eurocentricity that is still a problem here, and the capitalism and colonialism that is still a problem here. I feel aggressed by this presentation. How is it going to help with the crypto movement? When have the Black community become divided on how to reach sovereignty? I'm not sure what you mean by aggressed by this presentation, but remember, I was asked to do a presentation of 30 minutes on the question of pan-Africanism or perish. So I'm not sure where the crypto issue comes in. I didn't get into that for this one. But the short answer to that for me would be crypto is again a rebranding of Black capitalism, which I'm saying is a rebranding of itself of white, conservative, Eurocentric, capital colonialist. So that's how I think it's meant to intervene. And when the Black community become divided on how to reach sovereignty, I think it's possibly always been divided on how to reach sovereignty. So what I'm meaning to point to, at least today, is that old struggle is taking new forms that are, I think, more pernicious, more difficult to define and isolate and identify, and have a greater reach than ever before. It's so much easier now to foster the division than ever, I think, because, again, of the massive reach that is just alone, by that alone, the massive reach that is encouraged in a media environment that supports those kinds of narrow ideas. So, narrative warfare, psychological warfare, propaganda, it's just a euphemism. What's this? Doesn't it seem to feel like the latter of what you said about encroaching on the masses? So, but again, I think that this is sort of something I haven't really put any science to, but I think, and I haven't looked at what media studies have been done over the last few years in terms of in terms of measuring the prevalence, for instance, in media of LGBTQ people issues. But to the extent that it is becoming prominent, obviously more in that community or those communities are organizing and themselves pushing to have a larger voice in the public sphere. So that would be one reason it might feel like there is an encroachment. But there is also, I'm arguing, there is an intent by a white conservative elite to use that to promote those issues or those people and communities in ways that encourage a radical unification. So again, just it's the same thing. For if to what extent, this might be a good media studies question. To what extent are increasing LGBTQ narratives in media, to what extent do those narratives include substantive, meaningful reference to radical pan-Africanism, socialism, militant political organization, nationalist politics? In other words, that's sort of my point. In the same way those ideas have been condemned in every other instance, the promotion of LGBTQ stories by a conservative psychological warfare infused media environment is going to be done in the same way. So that's why I'm asking members of that Pan-African community to recognize that and say, while they are arguing for their rightful place in this struggle, in the world, in society, that they recognize and be mindful of, and to the extent that they aren't, I'm not accusing anybody or anyone of anything here, be mindful of the way that their issues are being corrupted made conservative, made to cloak and mask white conservatism and capitalism and colonialism, and move on that basis. So that's really what I'm saying. So it was the same way that I tried to approach what was over the last several decades, the increase, and I have seen some studies on this, of narratives involving so-called mixed or biracial and multiracial people. And they've done the same thing. The inclusion is meant to denigrate Black nationalism and community, to make it seem as though Black communities are somehow retrograde. They are used to mask how Black women are the least likely to be so selected and luckily chosen by another group. So it's the same thing. It doesn't mean I have any I feel any more self doubt or less self-worth or whatever. It's just a recognition that my issues are being played upon by the same psychological warfare environment that's playing upon anything it can get its hands on. So that's what I'm saying. So what I don't want us to do is to say, oh, there's more gay people on TV, and however we react to that be somehow used to cut ourselves off from Africans in our communities who are gay or LGBTQ plus, etc., who have a rightful place in the African community as we struggle for this pan-Africanism, as I defined earlier in the presentation. I mean, that's the admittedly the highest level of thought I'm bringing to the subject, but that's, to me, from a pure messaging standpoint, is exactly, I mean, I see them doing the exact same thing with gay and trans people that they have done with mixed and biracial, that they've done with women, that they've done with Black people writ large, that they're now doing increasingly with Latinos. It's the same game plan. It's just slightly adjusted, all with the goal of psychologically engaging in psychological warfare to disturb the kind of unity that I'm talking about, the radical unification, the militant the attempt for the goal of political power. Absolutely. And so again, and that's sort of my point, James. Those militant gay folks are not part of this increasing presence of the gay community in our media environment. There's no more inclusion of militant radical gays than there was of militant radical Black people, women, any other group. White, again, in a white supremacist society, there's no reference to white radicalism or a limited or distorted reference to white radicalism. They're not out here praising Marx and John Brown and whoever else and David Gilbert, who they just let out of prison. They're not praising these people. White folks don't like them either. So they're going to approach, it's the same thing. You want some trans folks? Boom. Let's get the CIA Latina commercial and the military trans, what was it, the first all LGBTQ attack helicopter crew. We like that's it. Oh, my bad. Did I miss a joke? I hate when I miss a joke. That's the problem of the media. My fault. My apologies. Yeah, the chat. You all are thorough. I'm just looking if there's something that requires my involvement. It doesn't look like there's much. So that could be about it. But I just wanted to bring that presentation here real quick and to honestly to use it to raise some of these issues I think are a concern. Like I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's debates about that too. But I think, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I'm certainly linguistically challenged. Do you tell people to respect you as a black man or a black heterosexual man? But if my heterosexuality had been previously threatened and demeaned and assaulted, I probably would say now that I'm a black heterosexual. I probably would add that. So if, you know, and if so I get it. I think I get it. I mean, if your preferred, or if your self-concept has been, if who you are has been aggressively denied and omitted and marginalized and then violently, even physically assaulted, and in this new moment, I could see why I would absolutely add all of my, I mean, I felt that way politically. Like I have absolutely identified myself as a socialist or a communist or a pan-Africanist or an internationalist when I thought that doing so would be even more provocative than just believing in those politics myself. So, I mean, I could see that. I could see, like I've said, I'm Jared and I'm a pan-Africanist. So I could see that. I mean, I could see why, but they didn't make it an issue for us all to care about. We made it an issue that they couldn't care it about, or I shouldn't say. See, that's really not even my argument. My argument would be European imperialism created a situation. White folks, this is white conservatives made gender and identity, and they made it taboo. They made it a violent situation. And in the context of capitalist accumulation, colonial violence, of exploitation, and in all of these other contexts, everything just gets worsened. So they did that. So that's what I'm saying. Folks now are just now saying the same way. Look, I mean, to me, I read that and it sounds like when white folks were saying 50 years ago, why you got to say you're black and you're proud? Why do you have to identify yourself as proud and African or proud and black or black? Why can't you just be an American? Why can't you just be a person? Why can't you? And people are like, nah, I'm a black man. You damn right. Anyway, look, man, we're not going to solve all of this. I don't have all the answers. And that's why I want to work in collectives, because even if I think I'm right, so what? And P-Funk, even if I agreed with that, my only point would be that that Pan-African plight includes Africans who are LGBT and Q. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying, that's all I'm saying. So the attempt to cut them off and claim some sort of radicalness, I think, is a mistake. It's not correct. And I've always liked Kwame Ture's answer to this when he's asked, are you an American? I have an American passport. All right, good people. I'm going to go check out some of these other conferences and some of the ones I've missed already. I know Jackie Lukman presented this morning as well at that conference. So if she doesn't do a version of this here, I definitely want to see that. And I definitely appreciate you all coming through, those who are here live, those who see this here later. Again, Pan-Africanism or perish. And as Fred Hampton used to say to you, I say peace only if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. Thanks again. Catch you tomorrow morning for I Mix What I Like. Once again, right here, same time, some boom bap breakfast, Black Power Media, everybody. Thanks again. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.